You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I am your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 84. In this episode, we'll be meeting Jim Heskett, who writes fast action spy thrillers. He also writes award-winning mystery thrillers, and as J.E. Heskett, post-apocalyptic thrillers. We're going to talk with Jim about his writing process, his books, and a whole bunch more, so stay tuned for my interview with Jim Heskett coming right up. But first, just a quick reminder, if you could please rate and review this podcast wherever that it is that you're listening to this right now, wherever you're subscribed to it, be it Apple Podcast or Spotify or Google Podcast, or wherever it is that you're listening to this, your review and rating helps me get the word out and helps this other people find the podcast. So I would really appreciate that. So here we go with my interview with Jim Heskett. Hey everybody, this is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author, and for this episode of the podcast, I'll be talking with Jim Heskett. How are you doing, Jim?
Hey Alan, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on, and it's kind of cool because I was on your podcast where you have your own podcast where you talk to thriller writers too.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. It's not a chit chat show. It's a very focused show. It's called Your Favorite Thriller, and I talk to thriller authors about their favorite thriller books, their favorite thriller books by other people. I thought it was like kind of the inside the actor's studio for thriller authors was my grand design. I think that was my intention.
Oh, well, it's a cool concept, and people should go check that out. It's a lot of fun to hear what all these thriller authors, their favorite books are. So it's always cool to listen to people talk about books.
Yeah, well, thank you.
So for our listeners, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
So I am an author, obviously, a thriller author. That's why I'm on this show. And I live in Colorado with my wife and small child, dog and a cat, the American dream, et cetera, et cetera. I've been writing thrillers since 2014 or 15. I'm technically a hybrid author. I'm mostly indie, but I have one book in an Amazon imprint. And I mostly write in the subgenre of spy thrillers, a little bit of crime, a little bit of noir, mostly spy stuff. And I also write dystopian and post-apoc under the pen name J.E. Heskett.
Oh wow! I didn't realize you had branched out into other subgenre as well. Those are so similar too. I know they're kind of different and but similar, if that makes sense.
What, dystopian and post-apoc?
Yeah, because to the thrillers, because they're kind of there's always action and they're pretty thrillerish, but I know the readers are pretty different. Do you find that in writing those two that there's a big difference?
Well, initially I had published them under my name. I have a dystopian trilogy and a post-apoc trilogy, and I had initially published them under my own name. And I really thought my readers were going to like it because I was basically, telling them, hey, it's thrillers. They're just in the future. They're just in a future war-torn America. But people were like, no, it's not the same.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I learned that lesson the hard way. But now that they're under a pen name, they're over there. People won't get confused. A different Amazon Central account. So that's I still think they're good books, but they're definitely a different kind of reader. I have a separate email list for those people now. It's all segmented because, I'm an author, and so I like to read widely, and I think there are a lot of people out there who do read widely, but there are even more people who like what they like, and they're not interested in branching out, which, it's unfortunate, but, people to each his or her own.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. I wouldn't realize it'd be such a pushback, but that's fascinating. So yeah, people like what they like.
Yep.
Yeah. So for our listeners, back to the thrillers, since that's what my listeners are into as well. Can you describe what your books? I know you have several series out. Can you tell us a little about them?
I have 3 main series. I think that's right. People ask me how many books I've written, and I'm not even really sure. But yeah, so I've got one completed thing that's a trilogy that actually has 4 books in it, which I know doesn't make any sense. But it would if you read it. That's the Whistleblower trilogy. It's 3 books and a prequel, basically, and that's a self-contained thing. That's like a conspiracy thriller, basically corporate conspiracy thriller. And then my longest running series is the Micah Reed series. That's currently at 9 books, and there's 1 more planned in the series, which will probably be sometime next year when I finally get around to doing that. That's a series about a former criminal who's trying to do the right thing. He's basically a guy who sort of stumbled his way into working for an American branch of a Mexican drug cartel. And then he got caught by the feds, turned federal witness, and now he's in witness protection. And he moved, halfway across the country, and he's basically trying to figure out how to live the straight life while constantly looking over his shoulder, because there's the cartel's still out there, so he's still he's not free. And that's what the series is about, basically, is him having adventures as a new person with a new identity while still being worried about people coming after him. And then my newest series is the Lane Parrish series, which is the pretty much action spy thriller. Lane is a retired government operative, basically retired government assassin who worked for a very small clandestine operations group, and he's retired and trying to basically spend time with his young child, but there seems to always be, how these stories go, there's always a reason for him to go back and undergo one more thing for the old group.
That's your latest book on that one. Is that Knife Point that came out in May?
Yes, Knife Point was the most recent book in that series, and that series is not done. I don't know if it's going to have an end point. I'm planning at least 1 more book in that, but I'm actually currently writing, I'm in the middle of writing a 6-book series with Nick Thacker that has nothing to do with anything I've written, but it's just an idea Nick and I workshop together. And so I'm writing the first drafts of all 6 of those books, and then Nick will take over, and those will probably be coming out mid-2020 would be my guess.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. And Nick was a guest on the podcast a couple of years ago. So.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, small world. How is that working with another author? Had you done that before?
I'd only done it once before, a couple years ago. I don't know if you know Jay Thorne, who's a horror author and a post-apoc author. He had this idea of taking his this horror series he had called American Demon Hunters and basically opening it up and creating a shared universe with other authors. And I just had what I thought was a fun idea, even though horror is not my genre. So I wrote a novella for him. So that wasn't, I don't know if that was really collaboration, because it was mostly like I said, hey, here's my idea, and he was like, all right, write it. And then he paid me, and then that was the last I saw of it. So it wasn't really a collaboration. But with Nick, he has this group of authors that were basically called his main series is the Harvey Bennett series. And he has this Harvey Bennett universe, basically, where he's invited some authors in to tell stories with his characters in that universe, and he sort of collaborates with each of them. So this is tangentially related to his Harvey Bennett books.
And so that's what you're working on now, but you might go back to the to Lane Parrish as well.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to when this 6 books. I mean, I'm 2 books into 6, so who knows how long my head will be down buried trying to get these 6 books done. But yeah, after that, I owe my readers the final Micah Reed book, because it's been, like 3 years since the last Micah Reed book. So hopefully they'll still be interested by the time I get around to writing that last one. But yeah.
When you're writing do you work on one at a time, or do you like one series at a time?
I would like to be able to say yes, but I'm not that consistent. Like the first maybe 5 or 6 Micah Reed books. I wasn't working on anything else. I was just focused on, getting those out and having some backlist and having a strong series people could go from one book to the next on. But since then, I've kind of bounced around. Basically, I didn't finish the Micah Reed series because the Lane Parrish series came up. Because I had that idea for the Lane Parrish book and I wrote it. I submitted it to Kindle Scout and it won. So because that was, a quote unquote traditionally published book, I wanted to work on more books in that series. And so that sort of derailed the Micah Reed series. I have a habit of committing to do something and then having an idea jump up inside my head and run around and bounce against the inside of, my brain until I can't really think about anything else. And then that idea just takes over and I have to do it.
And how was the process with the Kindle Scout? I remember that when that was, I know it's not around anymore, but did you find that enjoyable working in that world?
Yeah, it's not around anymore. I was actually the second or third to last book they chose before they shut it down. It was because, Amazon used to have what they called their breakthrough novel contest where they would, a bunch of books would enter and they would just pick one book to win it all. And then they came up with Kindle Scout, which was a pretty clever idea, which is basically like you could submit a book and then put it up on a website and readers would go vote for it. And if your book got enough votes, then Amazon would pick it and publish it under their Kindle Publishing imprint. I think that's what it's called. Kindle Press. Sorry.
Oh yeah, Kindle Press.
I forgot my publisher's name. Then Kindle Press would publish it. And the nice thing for readers was that if they voted for a book and Amazon chose it, then they would get the book for free. So I really wanted to win Kindle Scout. And so the Lane Parrish book was my third time submitting a book to Kindle Scout. And so this third time, like I had a big action plan, I really riled up I spent a lot of money on the cover. I spent a lot of time on the first few chapters, so they would be really, really tight and really exciting. And, I spent money for someone else to write, someone who knew what they were doing to write the blurb. And, I really promoted it and I made sure that it really got out there. And the first day I put it up, it hit Kindle Scouts, I think they called it hot and trending, which is like the front page. And then it stayed there the whole time. And then, so they chose that book, and so then it was basically like working with a traditional publisher, except instead of waiting a year to 2 years for it to be published, it only took a few months. I worked with the developmental editor who gave me some notes. Then I worked with a line editor, and they had some suggestions. Like we ended up changing the title and changing the cover. And so, that was good. It was, I'm glad I had that experience, because when I first started writing, I really wanted a traditional publishing contract. And, later after a couple of years of heartbreak of not being able to get an agent, I, went indie. But I'm glad I was able to have that experience of seeing what it would be like to work with a traditional publisher. But also Kindle Press is great because, they own that first book, but I own all this, I own the characters and I own all the sequels. So I can still do whatever I want, with that series. They just have the first book. So they don't have, it's not like a traditional publisher where they would, which is where how I think it works is that they would own, the series first refusal or whatever you'd call it, for the series. And so overall, it's been a very positive experience working with Kindle Press.
Yeah, that's cool. And that's cool that they got selected too, because I know a couple authors who did the Kindle Scout thing and they did really well too. They were hot and trending and they got a lot of votes and all that stuff. But then in the end, Amazon didn't pick them up. So even beyond that.
It's not just the most popular books. They still, they're still going to choose the books they think, are going to do well. But fortunately, they picked mine, and
that's cool.
I'm really glad. I'm proud of that book.
Yeah. So now, were you always a fan of thrillers? Like before you started to write, as a reader, were you a fan of the genre?
Well, I sort of stumbled into thrillers because, my after little kid books like Beverly Cleary and stuff like that, the first adult stuff I was reading on my own at age like 12, 13, 14 was Stephen King. And I wasn't aiming to be a horror reader or anything. I just really loved Stephen King. But the second book in his Dark Tower series was The Drawing of the Three. And I know Stephen King pretty much does whatever he wants and writes in, whatever genre he feels like, from book to book. But The Drawing of the Three was very much a thriller. And that's really when I fell in love with thrillers, because it's it's in the Dark Tower, so it's like fantasy Western kind of time travel-y. I don't even know how you would explain the Dark Tower. But that one book, The Drawing of the Three, was like lightning fast paced. It had cliffhangers at the end of every chapter, and it was just incredibly exciting. And I was like, this is the kind of story that I'm really into. So then I was, getting into John Grisham, all the classics, and yeah, it's continued on today. I love thriller books. That's probably why I write them.
And did you always want to be a writer?
Well, I wanted to be a writer when I was young, and then life got in the way. I thought I needed to have a career, and I've done a bunch of different stuff. I worked in mental health for a while. I worked in software. I've worked in learning design. I've worked in lots of different fields, which is great for a writer, I think, to have lots of varied life experience. I've lived in multiple countries. I've traveled around the world, which I think is something you really have to do as a writer. Unless you're Emily Dickinson, she was able to write and basically not ever leave her house, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so from a little kid, I love telling stories. From when I was a little kid, I loved telling stories, and I was writing my own stuff when I was probably 15. Mostly just because I was such a Stephen King fan. I started off writing horror, and it wasn't really until I took writing seriously, 5 or 6 years ago, that I realized that I wanted to tell exciting stories. I wanted to tell stories where there was suspense and tension and twists and turns, and I wanted readers to turn the pages as fast as they could. That was my goal.
And what's your process then? Do you do a lot of outlining, or do you just sit down and start to write these? Or?
I'm sort of in the middle. I guess I write what I call beats, which is basically a loose outline where I know the only thing I ever really truly pants will be short fiction, because it doesn't freak me out. But the idea of sitting down without, with just an idea and not a plan terrifies me, that my story could go off the rails, because I'm a pretty busy guy. So I don't have the time to like spend 3 weeks writing a story and then going, oh crap, this doesn't work. I need to get rid of the last, 10,000 words. So I usually have a pretty solid plan of what I'm going to write, but I leave myself room to experiment. I usually would write like one sentence per scene about what's going to happen. And the scene beat would say something like, the villain convinces the hero to turn over the nuclear codes, or something like that. I've never actually written that, but that's just what popped into my head. But I don't know when I sit down to write how that's going to happen. Or maybe even where I might pants the location. I know where the scene's going to begin and where it's going to end, but sometimes getting there is where I let my creative brain just sort of invent in the moment.
And what software do you use? Do you use Word, or do you use like Scrivener? Or?
I mostly use Scrivener. I use Scrivener to write, and a little bit of Word. Like if I'm working with an editor, usually they'll give me back a Word doc. But Scrivener to write, and a bunch of various note-taking tools. Google Docs if I'm collaborating, like Nick and I do a lot of stuff in Google Docs. And then finally, because I'm a Mac user, I have Vellum. So that's the last stage, is Vellum to format the books.
Yeah, I'm using Vellum too. It's kind of interesting how when you put it in there, you think everything's ready, it's ready to go, and then you still find like little like a typo or something even in there. It's like, oh, come on.
Oh yeah, I even if a book is professionally edited, there's always going to be a couple slip through. And fortunately, my readers are pretty forgiving, and I have a couple who will, email me afterward to say, hey, I bought your book and I found a couple typos here, and they're not angry. They don't go leave me a 1-star review. They let me know, and I think most people are pretty okay with it.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. So it's like free proofreading.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah. And so, when you're writing a story, do you do you set like goals, like a word count goal or page goal or?
Yeah, generally the way I do it pretty much is I will write a zero draft, which is what I call it. I mean, I didn't invent that term. I'm not that smart, but usually like I'll sit down and I write out my outline, my beats, right? And that's like I'm going to come up with 50 scenes. And like I know this novel is going to be 50 scenes long in order to tell the story. And I know from my own experience that 50 scenes is going to come out to be, say, 70,000 words when it's done. So my first draft will be more like 45,000 words. Then I go back and I expand on that in second draft and zero draft. Because one of the things I do is I really skimp on descriptions and dialogue and stuff like that in my zero draft because I just want to get it on paper as fast as possible. And I know that when I go back to do the second draft or the proper first draft is when I'm gonna I'm going to flesh out the characters, give them personality, like describe people, places, and things, and make their dialogue sound more like them. Where that's all in the first draft. I keep saying first draft, but what I mean is zero draft. And in zero draft, my intention is just to write as fast as possible, so I don't have to keep as much stuff in my head.
No, yeah, I just heard about that one from on a video that I was watching the other day. Something does that. They like go through it and then they go back and then they fill in they flesh it out afterwards. I like that.
It might have been my video because
yeah, it might have. You just did one.
Yeah, I wrote a book about this called The Juggling Author, and I have a YouTube account where I talk about some of the stuff from the book. Oh, yeah. So it could have been my video.
Yeah, I've got too many videos. Yeah, no, that's a cool process. So, and do you usually write in the same spot? Do you have like a dedicated spot, or you like go to different coffee shops or?
I don't generally go to a coffee shop unless there's a reason why I can't be at home. Like sometimes the only place I really go is the library. I don't like writing with distractions. I don't like to listen to music or stuff like that. I mean, I might listen to a movie soundtrack. If I am at a coffee shop or something like that, then yeah, I'll probably put the headphones in and go to my Amazon Music app and listen to a movie soundtrack. But I can't listen to anything with lyrics, because then I'll start, listening and thinking about the lyrics, and it gets distracting. So I generally have an office at home, a bedroom converted into an office, and that's usually where I write. Or sometimes I'll take the laptop out into the living room and kick back in the recliner. So generally I write within this like 5 square foot radius within my home.
Yeah, that's great. And then how many like from the time that you get the idea and you start writing it, like how long does it usually take for you to have the first draft done?
When I was working full time, probably about a month. Because I have a small child, and when I was working 40 hours a week, I'd only really get an hour to an hour and a half a day to write. But now that I'm just freelancing and doing other stuff and I don't have a regular day job, maybe like 2 weeks to first draft. If my first draft is 35 or 45,000 words, I can get that done in a couple weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, like 4,000 to 5,000 words a day is pretty typical for me if I'm able to focus on writing for most of the day.
Basically, sitting down and then just doing that. Everyone that I've interviewed, they take it very this is my job. I got to sit down. I got to put in the hours. So it's kind of, I know a lot of people wonder how people get to do it and put in the time, and that's the way you do it. You sit down.
Yeah, if you treat it like a hobby, then you'll produce like a hobbyist. Is that hobbyist? Is that a word? I don't know.
Sounds good.
That up. But if you treat it like a hobby, then you'll produce like someone who's just treating it like a hobby. If you treat it like a job, then you'll produce. I haven't been doing this very long, but I do have. I must have 1 million words out by now. I don't even really exactly know how many. I've published 20, 25 books. Just because Part of it is that I love it. I don't ever get burned out. I don't ever get to a place where I feel like I'm finished with that book. Now I just want to take a month to watch Netflix. I'm finish it, and then the next day I'm on to the next thing.
I really like your covers too. They really pop out a lot. Do you? How involved are you in getting those created?
Some of my early covers were mostly done by a guy named Kit Foster.
Oh yeah, I remember him.
Yeah. I need to say remember because he's pretty much disappeared.
Yeah.
He's a hard guy. I've been trying to get a hold of him about something actually, and it's really tricky to get a hold of him. Kate, if you're listening, please email me. The Lane Parrish covers were done by I cannot remember the name, but they were all done. The guy's name was Dane. I can't remember his company. Sorry, Dane. The Micah Reed covers were done sort of by me, and then Nick Thacker did them. He did the typography because that's the stuff I'm not very good at. I don't recommend people make their own covers, and I recommend that if you do work with a cover artist, you tell them don't micromanage them. I made that mistake early on, like with some of the first stuff I did with Kit, where I was like, this is exactly what I want, and I have the whole thing planned out in my head, and this needs to be here, and this needs to be over here, and this guy's got a gun, and it's pointing this way, and this woman has her hand over her mouth because she's in shock. I had to learn the hard way. Don't do all that stuff because a book cover is a marketing decision. It's a sales decision, like a book title. I tried to get too creative with some of the titles of my early books, and ended up later changing them because they just didn't make sense for the genre. I tried to be too clever. So to answer your question, Alan, I tried to be as uninvolved in the cover process as possible. I usually work with a cover artist. They say, fill out this thing. I fill out to their, bare specifications, and then I go and let the professionals do their jobs.
Before I let you go, any advice for listeners who are aspiring to write thrillers?
If you are aspiring to write a thriller, I think the best piece of advice I could give to you is don't quit. Writing is tough. If you're trying to get an agent and an editor and a TradPub deal, you're probably going to experience a lot of rejection. There's always that urban legend going around about how J.K. Rowling was rejected 12 times before she got an agent for Harry Potter, and any real writer knows that 12 rejections is nothing. Yeah. Yeah. Try a couple hundred. But, the only way to ensure failure is to quit. If you quit, you definitely won't be a success. There's a lot of rejection. There's going to be 1-star reviews. There's going to be comparisonitis. But if you keep pushing, then you can have the success you want.
All right, that's great advice. Thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it, Jim.
Absolutely, Alan. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Meet the Thriller Author podcast. Be sure to visit thrillerauthors.com to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover great thrilling reads. If you enjoy the podcast, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review to it, wherever it is that you're listening to this podcast, be it iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, wherever it is that you're listening to this right now. I would appreciate it. And please do check out my own thriller novels over at my website at alanpeterson.com. Until next time.